Anthropomorphic animals in comics and cartoons are so common, yet oftentimes we're just plopped into their worlds with no real explanation of any of the social dynamics at work or anything like that. And these social dynamics get more and more insane the more you think about them. Like, of course, you've got that classic question of how is it that Goofy is a dog that's basically his own autonomous person, and that's, despite him being a complete dumbass. But then you got Pluto, who's a dog that's a pet. Like, how is this allowed? Is Pluto just uneducated? Is he disabled? Does he get off on this? You got Brian Griffin, one of the more intelligent characters in Family Guy, with a life full of ambition, desires, and romance. Yet at the end of the day, Peter owns him. You got Elmira Duff constantly trying to turn her classmates into pets. You got BoJack Horseman just slinging horsecock all over the place. Whatever species, who cares? With that in mind, I promise that the Mr. Hands video is coming eventually. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. Anyway, obviously these things are usually for comedic effect. The absurdity is part of why it's funny. But what if you explored such a universe not for the sake of comedy, but to see what it would actually be like to live in such a world? The unique conflicts, the struggles of the characters, the politics of sentient animals living alongside humans. Well, in 2009, an acclaimed cartoonist named Dana Simpson decided to make a comic exploring such a world. However, what this comic would eventually be known for would not be a sober explanation of sentient pets dealing with the nature of their reality. Rather, what this comic is most known for is the scene where a dog gets caught making out in bed with the boy who owns her, so his parents have her spayed.
What?
For today's episode of Tales from the Internet, let's take a look at Raine Dog. This video is sponsored by Helix. Helix makes premium mattresses and bedding, custom fit to your needs and shipped right to your door. I've had my Helix mattress for a long time now, and it's still some of the best sleep that I've ever had. The neck pain that I was complaining about when I first got it still hasn't returned. Or for that matter, my back, shoulders, or any other weird problem area. It's really easy to get a Helix mattress of your own. You just take their sleep quiz, which helps determine what mattress is right for you based on your preferences and sleeping style. Since I'm a side sleeper who likes a soft mattress, they gave me the Sunset. And if you're nervous about buying a mattress from the internet, Helix gives you a 100 nights of sleep trial. That's more than 3 months. And if you don't like the mattress, they'll pick it up right from your door and issue a full refund. If you do like it, each Helix mattress has a full 10-year warranty. Plus, Helix offers financing options as well as flexible payment plans, so you don't have to pay for the whole thing right away. Just click the link below or go to helixsleep.com/wang. You'll get up to $200 off your Helix Sleep mattress as well as 2 free pillows. Alright, so I was working on a video about the Zootopia abortion comic. I'm sure a lot of you guys know what that is, and I'm gonna get to that video eventually. But as I was working on that, my memory of that infamous Raine Dog comic just popped into my head and I had to drop everything and focus on that. But to really talk about Raine Dog, we must first go to a time before Raine Dog. It begins in 1998 with a webcomic named Ozzie and Millie, created by DC Simpson. So Ozzie and Millie is a comic strip about 2 anthropomorphic foxes named, as you probably guessed, Ozzie and Millie. Each strip was generally self-contained with relatively few longer story arcs and was often compared to Calvin and Hobbes. Personally, I was unfamiliar with the series before working on this video, but it was very popular and it seems like there's still a large contingent of people online who remember it fondly. At the same time, she had also been drawing a political comic, I Drew This. This one, from what I could see, is a bit less well-liked, with common criticisms of it being that it's very preachy and rambly, with little to no actual attempts at humor. Just the typical political comic stuff where it's like everyone who agrees with me is smart and rational and everyone who disagrees with me is a dumbass that's loud and angry. Basically, par for the course for most political comics. Although that being said, there is a certain type of amused nostalgia I get looking at Bush-era political comics and memes in 2002. It just transports me back to a time when I was in college and everyone around thought this was the worst things would ever get. Ultimately though, Dana's dream was to get a comic syndicated, and that wasn't happening with either of these comics. So 2008, she pulls the plug on them and just starts to focus on getting work as an illustrator. At this time though, she thought about a project that had been rumbling around in the back of her head for quite a while. She explains in a blog post. The real seed was the comic Newshounds by my friend Thomas K. Dye. That comic starred an ensemble cast of highly anthropomorphized dogs and cats whose owner, Lorna, employs them as the staff of a TV station. One day I asked Thomas, so does Lorna pay them? He said yes, but as their owner she's not obligated to. The strip had also revealed in a flashback sequence that most of the cast had come close to being euthanized by a shelter. That's grim, man. All that got me thinking about pets in that universe, and in cartoon universes generally. Heathcliff, Scooby-Doo, Brian from Family Guy. It suddenly seemed weird and dark that in cartoons, we routinely meet characters who are perfectly sentient, who are basically people who are owned by other characters. And I wondered why that had never seemed weird before. I wondered about what that said and what it could be made to say. She began to think about the rights of these characters and how they might be different in different parts of the country, and how their struggles might be analogous to real-life civil rights movements, especially LGBT issues since Dana herself was transitioning at the time. Although she had drawn up some characters and concepts for Raine Dog, though she didn't make it because she didn't have the time back then. But now with no other deadlines to worry about, she was finally able to bring Raine Dog into reality. And it was on January 16th of 2009 that Raine Dog would make her debut. It starts off with a fully grown Raine talking about life in the city and how much more pets are treated like people there. She alludes to how she's somewhat responsible for that, implying that there's a sort of pet civil rights movement she's involved in that we'll eventually learn more about. She goes to the coffee shop and buys herself a chai latte and gets annoyed at the barista's little microaggression. She calls her girl. It's a bit of a condescending thing to tell a living anthropomorphic dog. We travel back in time as she narrates her childhood memories, getting adopted and brought home by a nice rural family. In one of the earlier chapters, one which Dana would later reflect on as being one of the things from the comic that she actually is proud of, Raine learns how to read from the boy who owned her, and she reads a book about Laika, a dog that was sent into space as part of the Soviet space program. Laika becomes Raine's idol, envisioning her as a hero who volunteered to risk her life for science, only to later find out that she was simply a stray who was sent up there to die alone as an experiment. It's a real-life, genuinely sad story, and it's a pretty interesting concept to think about how sentient animals in a world like this would think about such stories. But things already go off the rails by the time we make it to Chapter 4, On the Fence. So, Raine and the boy Jeff spend all day playing fetch. Raine gets tired, so her and the boy take a break and sit on a fence. He asks her why she likes to play fetch so much, and she's like, I don't know man, I'm a dog. That's what dogs do. Then he lays this line on her. I almost forget you're not human. You're just, you know, the cool girl I know who catches things in her mouth. I know a lot of cool girls who catch things in their mouth. And then they hold hands. Cut to a rainy night. It's cold and wet outside, and Raine is freezing. So Jeff brings her in through the window to sleep in his bed. And that's when we get to the page of legend. A page that would probably be as infamous as Loss if only the comic were more well known. You ready for this? Morning, Jeff. Hey, when you think about it, I'm the first girl you ever spent the night with. Yeah, Then they kiss. Then they get caught. Jeff, oh my god. Can you imagine you wake up one morning, you go into the other room and you find your son making out with the family dog in his bed. Like, what do you even do? So here's what they do. The next page, Raine's blacked out. She awakens and, oh, she's been spayed. Pretty high price to pay just for your first kiss. There's a lot to think about here. For starters, I don't know, if I had a kid and I caught him one day making out with the family dog, I'd punish the kid, not the dog, because it seems way more likely that, I don't know, just keep him away from the peanut butter. There's also the ramifications of a pet that's as sentient as a person being able to be spayed or neutered. Like right there, you're going into like some horror elements that are probably too dark for the story that they're telling here. And then there's the fact that if the story is intended to be an allegory for LGBT struggles, it kinda makes it seem like the author is likening homosexuality to bestiality. Which, considering where the author is coming from, it's probably not what she intended, but it can definitely be read that way. You got a page where a little boy is making out with a dog. It's obviously going to be controversial for so many reasons. But regardless, the story continues on. We get to see Raine running away from home, her journey across the country, making her way to the city, interacting with all different kinds of animals, with varying opinions about freedom and their own autonomy. We meet her new owner/roommate in the city who treats her like a fully grown person, but also gives her belly rubs. And then after about a year-long run, the story abruptly stops. Obviously, the part of the comic where the little boy gets caught making out with his pet dog overshadows absolutely everything else that was written. Like, it's not even just that they were making out, it's like you got the romantic build-up towards it. You had to put in work for that kiss. And it would be the kiss page, sometimes with the spaying page, that would go viral from time to time. It wasn't until 2016, when the page had gone viral once again on Twitter, that Dana finally felt the need to respond. She wrote a blog post entitled Raine Dog, Legend of an Unfinished Comic. In the post, she details the origins of Raine and how people received it, for instance, being referred to as that dog fucker comic, a label that she obviously rejected. She mentions that she did have some regrets with the comic. For instance, she didn't plan it at all. There was no outline, she basically just made it up as she went along. She also regretted making the character too much of a self-insert, which in her opinion and in the opinion of some of the audience made it come across as very self-indulgent at times. But then she makes it to the dog fucker part, which she's not quite sure was a mistake. Here's what she had to say about it. The page where they kiss has been posted out of context so many times. I most recently saw it today on Twitter, which got me started writing this. People have accused me of advocating bestiality, which is pretty far removed from what I was trying to do. I've had to explain many times that no one is having sex in that chapter, or trying to. It was supposed to be dramatic and attention-grabbing, even a bit unsettling. But I hope that at least people would take it within the context of the rest of the story. Plenty of people did. Plenty of people didn't too, and they were loud about it. Now, in terms of context, the first time that I had seen this page, I believe it was in the Twitter post that she's referencing. And in that context, it's like, holy fuck, how does a person even conceive of this? Like, when you just see that page and maybe the page after it, it seems like it was specifically written for someone to get off to. When viewed in the context of the comic, and knowing the rules of the world it exists in, which we've basically done in this video, it's still pretty what the fuck. Granted, when viewed in that context, it no longer, to me, comes across as a blatant porn thing, but it's still absolutely wild to think of a person conceiving of this and bringing it to life. And granted, in a world like the one that is being written about in this story, shit like that probably would happen, but it's just so fucking jarring even when you've seen the rest of the comic. She also mentions that she believes that some of the reaction it got was because she was publicly transitioning at the time. And now, although, yeah, if you're trans on the internet, you're going to have some people who want to come at you just because they don't like what you are. And she probably did have some people in her established audience who felt some kind of way about it. That being said, so many people saw this without any knowledge of who the author is, and they had a reaction that's a pretty likely reaction to seeing a comic of a boy making out with his pet dog. Regardless, she eventually concedes that including that in the story was probably a mistake. But she was also just unhappy with the comic in general. There was even a relaunch at some point which depicts an activist Raine speaking at a rally and getting shot. A scene where she recalls a reader remarking, "Martin Luther King." But this incarnation of the comic never made it past the first 4 pages. She mentions that a lot of people ask her to continue the story, but she likely never will. Although she thinks that there is a good story in there somewhere, the themes she was writing about are just not as relevant to her life anymore. Ultimately, the Raine debacle wound up being a minor hiccup in her career, as she would eventually achieve her dream of having a syndicated comic. Pretty quickly, actually. After winning Amazon's comic strip superstar contest with her comic Girl, Dana would receive a contract for a syndicated comic. This comic would evolve into a comic named Heavenly Nostrils, and then into Phoebe and Her Unicorn, a comic which still runs to this day. Anyway, that's the story of the comic where a boy kisses his pet dog on the mouth. Romantically. If you like this video, check out my video about Colby the Labrador. I'm out.